Hello, everyone. We should be back. Hi, we are here. Welcome to Gamer Stories. I'm very excited. Uh, so this is a series that I sort of came upon by accident when I was talking with Anna Geeks, and she was telling her story, and I thought, actually, this is what I want in my life. I want to talk to other gamers about how they got into gaming and what does it mean to them, and just find out a little bit about them and give a space for everybody in chat to also ask some questions of some of the gamers that are around. And I wanted a bunch of different sorts of gamers who have different experiences. And we started with Anna Geeks, who has a game development background. Then we went to Barantor, who's an old school gamer and was also a Marine. And now we have got Little Red Dot, who's got a really interesting theater background. And if you have seen her as Maester Raphael over on Roll For It's Riverlands Game of Thrones show, you will know she's got mad theatrical makeup skills. Oh. Please, please do. So good. So I'm happy to have our guest for today be Little Red Dot. I just want to say I'm also excited for our guest next week. Oh, you're right. Hold on. Little Red Dot is muted.
Oh, no.
You are no longer muted.
Oh, okay, great.
Thank you. You're no longer muted. I muted you because of during the break screen. Yeah, anyway. But I'm going to work that out. And let me turn you up as well.
I was about to say, I can always turn myself up.
I've got you. I have got you. So wait, Jer, can you make Little Red Dot a regular for me so she can post links, please?
No. I've been blocked.
No. No, ignore Nightbot. Nightbot is super sassy.
Damn it, Nightbot! Stop being so sassy.
Nightbot is so sassy.
It's only Wednesday.
Yes, and I just want to say before we get into it that I want to say who are. I think it's. Thank you. Lies Trooper does this every time. You don't talk till he's done talking. Damn it. I was going to say that next week we're going to have DSB as our guest, and DSB is a relatively new gamer who went to the college that I teach at, and so we get to have people who have like lots of experience, people who have young experience, and so I'm really excited about a great mix of people. But today we get Little Red Dot. Little Red Dot, tell us where we can find you. Tell us about yourself a little bit.
Oh my. Okay. Well, if you need links, if that's where you find your comfort zone, you can find me online on pretty much every social media site as Little Red Dot. I think on Instagram, there are 2 T's on dot for my Instagram account because unbeknownst to me, Little Red Dot is actually a slang term for Singapore.
Oh.
Which I did not know. This is like a whole side. We're about to hit a side quest gang, yes. Which is like a whole side thing. So anytime I attempt to get like true, just like flat out Little Red Dot, you can't because Singapore owns the like digital rights to everything. But I am little_red_dot on all the social media, on Twitch, Twitter. You'll be able to find me and check out what I guess I'm up to. Yeah, I'm a DM, and I consider myself a digital storyteller. I'm a bit of a game fanatic, and I live and have always lived to tell story. But it's taken me a long time, I think, to find this place because I actually started out in theater.
Okay, so by the way, chat, if you have questions for Little Red Dot or you just want to chat along with us and have thoughts, just put them in there and we will see it. But Little Red Dot, where's your home state?
So I'm a Georgia girl. I was technically born in New York, but my parents moved back to Georgia, where they were both from when I was like wee baby. So I was like technically all but born in Georgia. So I was raised here. I went to school twice in the state of Georgia, once in Savannah, once here in Atlanta. I've lived a few places, but for some reason I kind of just came back. So I'm a Southern girl at heart.
And now, what was that like growing up? Let me first ask you this question. When did you first encounter tabletop RPGs?
Okay, so that was actually not till much later in life. It's funny. I grew up in a really small farming community. There's a small town about 45 minutes before you hit the Florida line in Georgia called Blackshear. Like population 4,000 on a good day.
Wow.
One red light town. Everybody's either a farmer, a firefighter, a policeman, or a teacher. Like that's, you know what I mean? Like it's one of those kind of places. And so I grew up in this really tiny town, and we were actually up until, I guess within the last like 5 years, we were the only county in the state of Georgia that didn't have its own library.
Really?
30% of the roads in my town are unpaved. I grew up on a dirt road. So I came from just this like very humble, small town girl background. And I actually didn't really start, I guess, my nerd journey in tabletops until way later in life. It was comic books is kind of where I started. Ooh. And so as a child, I had childhood cancer. I had a form of cancer called Burkitt's lymphoma. And because we didn't have a library in my town, the only books I ever got to read were what were assigned to me at school. So when I started going through chemotherapy treatments, I had to go all the way to Jacksonville, Florida to receive those treatments. Wow. Because it was about an hour and a half. That was the nearest hospital to us that could actually treat me.
What was the drive?
About an hour and a half.
Okay.
So we were about an hour and a half to any major highway where I grew up. So we would go to Jacksonville. I was treated by Nemours Children's Clinic, and they had a children's library. And because I spent so much time in hospitals, I had to find things to do. And because of the kind of cancer I had, my immune system was low. So I was not really allowed to be around a lot of other people. I had to take 2 years off from school. And so I spent all this time in a hospital, which is like a 7-year-old's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
And so I started scouring the library, which I, at the time, didn't even know what a library was. Like, I didn't even know there was such a thing. But the children's library at Nemours had comics. And so that was really my first major deep dive into kind of this nerd culture, the idea of superheroes and these kind of things. So I spent all my time in the hospital coloring and reading comic books.
What were the comic books you read?
So they had a large collection actually of, so I was a DC kid, they had a lot of DC, but they had a very strangely well-rounded collection of X-Men comics, which was my Marvel, I guess intro. And so I read a whole lot of X-Men. So that was kind of where I started. There was something I just found, I just found it really personal, I guess. X-Men is where I'm at actually that's just where I started, I guess, was X-Men and DC Comics. I've always been a super Batman girl. And those were the two, I guess, big ones for me growing up were Batman and X-Men. I remember actually when Stan Lee died, God rest his soul, I wrote an article for one of the local college newspapers all about my first intro to Stan Lee and what he did for me as a child. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, it's strange because it's as a kid, you can't really process it the way you do as an adult. And you look back and you're like, dear God, what a sob story I was.
but also probably in an inspirational way, right?
Oh, for sure. The article I wrote was more about how Stan Lee reframed heroes and the concept of a hero is not about your powers, but really about what you do with them. It's the choices that you make that make you a hero.
Now, were you doing theater in high school?
So yes, so we had a county-wide high school. Everybody went to one high school. There were no you didn't get to choose which high school you went to. We went to a county-wide high school, and we had zero arts funding. I remember they cut the debate club when I was in high school to fund new jerseys for the football team.
Oh,
so that's the kind of place I grew up.
Yeah,
lots of church, lots of sports. But we had a theater club. I did my first play. So as most Southern children will tell you, you get your intro to arts actually via church. Most kids do. Music, chorus, theater, these things come to you based on church. It's where you have funding and access to it. So I had been doing church pageant plays and those kind of things for quite a long time growing up. But when I got to middle school, I was introduced. My very first play was I Never Saw Another Butterfly. which is if you don't know, is a play about a group of children through the Holocaust.
Oh, wow.
Well, there's one girl in particular as she writes this play and talks about the last butterfly she saw before she was dropped in a concentration camp. But anyway, so that was like my very first like real access to something outside of church, like my first audition, my first theater play. And then the next year, I remember my 8th grade year, we did Into the Woods Junior.
Oh.
Oh yes, somewhere I still have my T-shirt from my middle school production of Into the Woods Junior, where I played the witch.
Nice. Starting early, not being the ingenue.
Yeah. Well, that changed a lot later on. So that's kind of where I guess I got my start. And then when I got to high school, I was a cheerleader and did a lot of competition cheerleading. And I remember after my 9th grade year, my coach came to me and she said, "You're spending way too much time in drama. You're going to have to choose." And I was like, "Police, do you really think I'm going to choose cheerleading, competition cheerleading over drama? You've lost your mind." So I went to cheerleading squad. I joined band. I played on the percussion line, the usual like nerd centric process. And I did theater a lot. Granted, we were very low funded. We didn't even have like really a legitimate auditorium. I think our stage is what most high school like stages consider just the apron. It was like just the front part. So we made do with what we had. I did a lot of like, state conferences and things, but I really fell in love with the medium of storytelling, which now at this point in my life, I can realize that's really what I was in love with. It wasn't so much acting as it was telling stories, because that's it's just a very personal thing to me. And especially growing up as a child that didn't have access to a lot of literature. Stories were told by my grandfather and by my uncle, and we get this oral tradition, I guess you could say, this oral tradition of telling stories. And then, when you're a kid in a hospital, you get people that come in and they tell stories to kids. And so stories are just a huge part of how I coped really with my childhood and that kind of thing. So yeah, I did theater. And then
you went to SCAD?
I did. I turned down a full ride to Georgia Tech to be an engineer.
Really? Wait, rewind. I just feel like you just dropped a surprise bomb on us here.
Yeah, so I was gonna design car engines. I was really into automobiles, and I was a car kid. I've always thought cars were really cool, so I wanted to design car engines. My father was a nuclear engineer, and I was going to follow in that footsteps. He was so super proud. And then I remember my drama teacher, I did my first Shakespeare play when I was a junior in high school, Midsummer Night's Dream. And
who were you?
Hermia.
All right, go on.
Come on, like I'm this short, weird kid. So I played Hermia, and I did a monologue for my 9th grade literature class, Romeo and Juliet, a Juliet monologue, and I just kind of fell in love with Shakespeare, like on a obsessive level.
By the way, what's your favorite car? Atomica wants to know, what is your favorite car?
My favorite car, like now car or then car?
Either one.
Okay, so
Both?
Now I don't keep up with car culture like quite as much. But how about this? I'll tell you this. If I had my choice of cars, like if Dot could go out and like buy any car from any period that she wanted, I would have to have two. I would have a 1962 VW Westphalia. It would be teal. It would have a wood-lined inside, and I would simply close down my life and travel the country in a Westphalia van. Okay, so that's one. And then if Dot could have like a car that has to get her back into work, I would have a purple El Camino.
Nice.
Which I feel like says everything about my personality. At the time, Dot in high school really, really wanted a 1964 Thunderbird with like the porthole windows in the back. Yeah, and leather seats and like the pinstripe down the center. But I'm not that Dot anymore.
I mean, my dream car was always a 1926 Bentley Speed 6 in racing green, because Mr. Steed in the Avengers had a roadster that way, and like who does not want a 1920s roadster? Like,
right? Like, well, I don't.
Now I realize it is probably not a practical car to have because it's from the 20s, but that was great.
I just really always wanted an El Camino. It was one of those things. I remember there was a guy that went to my church. Yeah, right. There was a guy that went to my church who had one, and I was so super jealous. His was black, but I want this like midnight purple one. Maybe one day when I'm super old and not technically cool enough to drive one anymore, I'll have one. I'm still saving up for my VW van, so don't worry about it. It'll happen.
So you discovered Shakespeare. I
did.
discovered Shakespeare at 11 or 12.
Okay, so that was much earlier than me. Like I didn't really get Shakespeare until high school because we were fed it right in the classroom. And I remember reading like Romeo and Juliet because we had to, but it was actually the first time I read Coriolanus. That was issue. Oh no, I'm sorry. Julius Caesar was my first one. So Julius Caesar came to me in 10th grade, and then 11th grade we read Coriolanus, and I fell in love with both of those plays. Like the high level of politics, deeply embedded, and the conflicts between being a leader for people and the sacrifices that we make just like resonated with me on this super like high level. And I just fell in love with Shakespeare. So I just started reading it and reading it and reading it. And then we did Midsummer Night's Dream my junior year. And so I auditioned and I got the part of Hermia, and I just kind of fell in love. Yeah. And so I remember getting my acceptance letter to Georgia Tech and going sobbing in the costume closet to my drama teacher. That was like, I don't know if I can do that. You know, just like ugly crying to her. And she's like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I just want to be a Shakespeare actress. And she's like, well, let me help you with that. And so she really encouraged me to start applying to some art schools. Yeah. For the record, there are very few schools that specialize in classical theater specifically. Most of them were on the West Coast, and my father was adamant that I couldn't leave the state. Small town, right? So I couldn't leave the state. So he was like, you have to stay in state. I was like, okay. So I started looking at schools, and I found SCAD, which is a private school, which makes it just as expensive as going out of state. But I took a giant leap of faith. I left my tiny town of Blackshear and went and took an audition for a like portfolio scholarship. Did a Juliet piece for them and got accepted. I can actually remember getting the acceptance letter in the mail for SCAD. They'd be like, you've been accepted. You've been given X amount of dollars for your scholarship. And literally like screaming. My mother's like, oh my God, what's wrong? And I bolted out of the house and ran laps in our yard until I could like catch my breath and my thoughts enough to call my father and be like, I'm not gonna be an engineer. So yeah, and then I went off and I did my 4 years at SCAD in media and performing arts and took a specialization and took a minor in scenic design and production design. So I still have part of my like engineering piece, like AutoCAD and scenic building and those kind of things. So I did a lot of that, some scenic design, but I spent a lot of my time in college, specifically my summers, working for Shakespeare companies across the US. So that's kind of what I did.
That's amazing.
I had very little interest in film and television, which everybody is all about now, but I really just wanted to do Shakespeare. So I worked for a few Shakespeare companies, the New Jersey Shakespeare Festival, no, they call themselves, the New Jersey Shakespeare Festival, the Utah Shakespeare Festival, and the one up in Portland. Oh God, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
Yeah, Ashland.
That's what I was looking for and couldn't find.
I wanted to go to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art so bad. That was like my goal. Because Diana Rigg, who was in the Avengers, she went to the RADA, and so I was going to go to the RADA. That was my plan. Because I discovered Shakespeare only because I accidentally saw the Avengers on television when I was like 11 or 12. And I just caught like the end of the episode, and there was this cool woman like tied into a racing car up on cinder blocks with like a video screen in front of it, and she was having to like maneuver this racing car through the screen, right? And if she became very clear that if she messed up, she would die because it was like sort of set to these electrodes. And there was this guy trying to save her, but he was sort of incompetent, and he was running around having fights while she was like doing this thing. And then he would try to save her, but he just sped up the car. So she now had to like race this car super fast, and she was cool and she was doing it. Then he tried again, and then it started going backwards, and she could still do it. And she finally got out of there, beat up the bad guys. I was like, who is this woman? She's amazing. And I was like, okay, I need to see what else she did. And then she did Julius Caesar with Laurence Olivier on television. I saw it, and that's when I saw Shakespeare. I was like, I need to go where she went to train.
Yeah, I need that in my life.
I need that in my life. And I got accepted to a couple of art schools, but they were not the RADA. And so I joined the Army so that I could afford to go to the RADA.
So I did. So the moment I was like solidified in like doing professional Shakespeare, I remember SCAD has a film and TV event that comes through Savannah every year. It's one of the biggest non-professional, like collegiate level film and TV events, or really it's film, but It's called the SCAD Film Fest. It's a huge fucking deal. They bring in celebrities from all over. And I remember my sophomore year, Ian McKellen.
Mm.
And I was a wrangler for a lot of the actors. First off, you guys should know he is one of the most genuine, fantastic human beings in the world. And when he got here and found out that we had a group of kids that did Shakespeare, he was like, oh, well, I want to do a Shakespeare workshop for the kids. And so my professor called me up. I remember this vividly at like 11 o'clock on like a Saturday night. She's like, Monday morning, Ian McKellen is going to be here and he wants to do a workshop with 2 of our kids. We've chosen you and another guy. And I was like, right? Like totally vomit in the mouth type thing. And I was like, so I showed up Monday morning. We did this workshop in front of the entire like theater student body. And I did a Cressida monologue for him. And when I got done, he simply stood up and his like sweater that clearly his great grandmother had like knitted for him and his like green Dolce & Gabbana shoes. And he was like, darling, that was amazing. Can we cast her in this, please? And I was like, if I pass out now, will you catch me? McKellen? Just really, truly one of the coolest people. But it was that moment where he like, it was a period of affirmation for me when Ian McKellen's like, good job. You know that you've got something that really like fits. Yeah. And so I really dove in that sophomore year into like finding more work. And so I had worked at all these Shakespeare companies. I'd gotten all of this professional work. And then my senior year, I could book nothing. I had zero opportunity my senior year coming out. And so I actually applied for the Peace Corps. I had an application ready to submit to the Peace Corps when I got a phone call from a theater here in Atlanta that's a very contemporary, very LGBTQ friendly theater called Actors Express. And they were like, we'd love to bring you in as an intern for a full year. It's like a full internship, but you're going to need to move to Atlanta. And so I accepted because I literally had nothing else going for me, which was the first time in years I felt like a complete fail. I had gone to like New York on this big showcase. I had auditioned with like NBC and ABC and just like it wasn't working for me. I'm a bit of a character and I'm very bold and big and I'm just really not built for film and TV. So
Ara Savad is following us. Thank you. Have no privacy. Oh, I always feel that somebody's watching me. Tell me, is it just a dream?
Well, hey, Eris. We hanging out, we talking. So yeah, the long and short is that's what brought me to Atlanta. Actually, I had like a 2-month period of time I was supposed to be living with my parents. And I went to my first music festival that summer, took my first psychedelics that summer, which was a whole eye-opening extravaganza. And then I had to move back to my podunk town for 2 months. It was 2 weeks. I was there for 2 weeks before I thought I was going to lose my mind. I literally packed everything I could fit into my SUV. I drove to Atlanta on July 4th and took the first apartment I could come across. And this July 4th marked 8 years since I've been in Atlanta.
Wow. That is a, we've got another follow.
Follow.
Me, and I have no privacy. Whoa, I always feel that
I see you out there.
Somebody's watching me. Tell me, is it just a dream? We sing when we get follows and hosts. It's a thing.
Do we? I missed that. Okay, I'll stop.
It's a thing we do.
I technically can sing, but it's actually one of my greatest fears singing in front of people. So I can recite Shakespeare though.
You know what? Here's the thing. Dot, can I just tell you a thing?
That is what I'm here for.
I want to do theater live on Twitch.
So I'm working on this.
Okay.
It's something that I think is a really interesting opportunity. So I now work for a theater. So I guess, okay, so let me hop, skip, and jump. So internship, I got an agent. I tried to work film and television. I was miserable. I've never been more miserable in my life than when I was trying to audition and work in film and TV. The only major thing I ever did that was like on a high level was what's known as an industrial. For those of you that are not in the entertainment industry, industrials are usually training videos or back-end videos that get filmed and given to corporations for various reasons. So I filmed this industrial that was an HR training video. If you work for Verizon or AT&T outside of their sales floor, honest to God, I am in a training video that gets played for you about HR. I play this like Christian girl, and it's all about like appropriate workplace conversation. How do we deal with people from different backgrounds? And I played the very hoity-toity Christian girl in the workplace, the corporate workplace. I get about one message a week that's like, hey, I think I saw you in this video. I'm serious. Like people from my background and my history will just email and be like, I think you're in this training video I saw this week. And I'm like, fuck.
And you're like, yeah, I was.
So embarrassing. It's the most money I ever made doing film and TV. So did that, got an agent. I was with them about 18 months and was just miserable. And so I dropped them and went back to trying to do theater. And I did theater for many years. I started a theater company with a group of people. We created kind of devised and interactive theater here in Atlanta for a while.
Wow.
Called Catalyst Arts Atlanta. I did some environmental and like outdoor artwork for a while. So I started doing that kind of thing.
Nice.
And it was like a whole phase of my life trying to kind of figure myself out. But I guess I don't know. I say all of that because it somehow led me to here. You asked, the very first question was, where did I get started in tabletop? So when you're training to be a Shakespeare actor, oh yes. Oh, I saw that finger. What?
Wait, so I have to sing one more thing.
Oh,
we just got some bits in from
bits?
From Volpes, and whenever we get tips or bits, I sing "We're in the Money," but as Ginger Rogers sang it in the film Gold Diggers of 1933, which is in Pig Latin. So
I cannot do that. So that's all on you, my friend.
But then you get to, and Volpes is donating so that you can hear the Pig Latin. This is.
I see.
This is for you.
Oh, I can't wait.
Earway in hay the anime, earway in hay the anime. Eve way at gale at way of way at way it wakes te ute it gale ang way. Earway in hay the anime. Either I skays or any say. Old man the 80 and pray, ooh yare ooh three west aste angreo. Ewe ever ni it red lands lay, of wed brands lay today. And when we see the anley or ukley at the eye get right in the eye, we're in the money, we're in the money. We've got a lot of what it takes to get along. Thank you so much, Volpes, for those bits, and so that little red dot could, hear
it in its fullest capacity.
I mean, Ginger Rogers was amazing. She used to sing songs in Pig Latin on vaudeville before she became a famous person.
You told me that. What was that, last night? You told me that? I was like so impressed when I heard that. I was like, damn.
Right? How cool is that?
Vaudeville, such a strange place.
So amazing.
Yeah, right.
So you are in Atlanta. You're doing theater.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow you find RPGs.
Right. So actually, I found RPGs much earlier. So I found them when I was in my undergrad program. So when you're training to do Shakespeare, one of the things that you just have to know how to do is fight combat. You just have to know how to wield a sword because so much of it. So, and I absolutely adore rapier and dagger.
Me too.
Oh my god, so much. So I did a lot of fight. So I did a lot. I'll show you guys my rapier dagger somewhere. It's over there.
Mine's over there.
Yeah, I have like a huge love of fight choreography and fight combat. It was just something that like I am not a dancer. Dot can't dance her way out of a paper bag, but you best believe I can slice my way out of it. So, right, like, so fight combat was really where I found my niche and found a way to kind of simmer and sit in my body in a very comfortable way, which a lot of dancers find, and it's just not where I found it. So my fight combat teacher at the time at SCAD, really nice man, very Irish. He came to me after I was in a level 2 class and he's like, hey, I know this is not probably appropriate, but if you would like to maybe, wield fake swords and tell some stories. I play Dungeons and Dragons. Have you ever been interested? I think you'd really be cool for it. And I play with a few other students, like on Sundays at a coffee shop. And I was like, this dot in. Like I was so down for it. I was like, yes! So it was my fight combat teacher who had been playing Dungeons and Dragons for like 30 years. He brought me to the table and taught me to play. He taught me 3-5. And after a single session, we played like an 8-hour session. I was hooked. So then I was like, okay, I have to know all the things. So I went out and bought a 3-5 book. And then I was like, well, now I got to buy a second edition book because I got to know.
Right.
And then I turned around and bought, he hated 4, but I bought a 4. And I read all of the things and kind of super became obsessed. And so my friends in college and I, we played on and off very casually. And then when I moved to Atlanta, I didn't have anybody that played. I met, in fact, somebody that's still my best friend to this day. I remember we showed up at our first day of the internship. And all the interns were like, you guys want to go out for drinks? And, 21-year-old Chelsea's like, heck yeah, I can drink till the cows come home. And so we went out for drinks, and I'm sitting there next to this very awkward guy, and me being awkward and weird too. I was like, hey. I was like, hey. I was like, what do you like to do? He was like, no, I roll dice and play Dungeons and Dragons. I was like, fuck me too, man. So it was like this instant friendship. And so we like high-fived, and after that we started planning a campaign. And so I GM'd for the first time when I moved here in 2011.
Wow.
I had been playing for many years before that, but like I GM'd my first campaign because my friends, I wanted to teach all my friends to play so that I could play. So that's kind of where I got started. And so we did that on and off for quite a long time, actually, you know, getting schedules together and stuff in person is kind of a big thing. And then as most actors, you have a side gig. And I was working in retail management and was very good at it. And was working my way up through a company called Paper Source, which if you live in the States and you're in a larger city, you may have seen a couple paper sources around. And decided that I really hated corporate America. And this business acumen that I had, I really wanted to bring to the arts. So I reapplied to grad school in 2013 and went to SCAD Atlanta campus and got my degree in arts business management, which is basically an MFA for arts business. So everything from like recording to marketing, which is what I kind of did my specialty into, theaters to museums to those kind of things. So I have a deep passion for nonprofit arts, and that's kind of how I got, I guess, to where I am. That's what helped me launch my own theater company and like arts company here in Atlanta. And I did that for a long time. And I've worked for everything from history museums to art galleries to theaters.
Now, when I met you, you were like the vice principal of a school.
Yeah. So that's a whole kind of separate thing. I'll tell you, there is something about nonprofit that will totally give you the burnout. Yeah. And that's really, I think, where I was. I was at a point where I was still trying to be an artist. And I was working at the time for a company called C4 Atlanta, which I still love. I'm a donor. One day I hope to serve on their board. They are a service nonprofit. So they do not produce or present. Their goal is to help artists in business. So they offer everything from like low income health insurance to training and things like building a website, marketing, launching your business plan. The things that artists just don't get when you go to art school. They teach you all about making your art, but they have zero interest in teaching you how to sell it, which is really a detriment to the artist as a whole. And so C4 is kind of that piece in the middle where they offer a membership, opportunities to connect with other artists, to help you build your business, to get you in with an attorney. So I became an operations manager for this company and was there about 2 years, which was very fulfilling and one aspect of my life. But I spent almost 2.5 years serving a lot of artists, and I stopped making art.
Oh, yeah.
And because of that, I found I had hit a high level of burnout. And so what I did was I took a step back and I said, I love your company, but it's time for me to be on the opposite end of it. Yeah. And so I went back to trying to be an artist. At the time, I had launched a podcast with some friends here in Atlanta called North by Northwest, which was my chance to play D&D regularly. It was just kind of this little blip. And it was going well, and really I just needed a break. And so I was applying for other jobs, and I got a job as a performing arts teacher at a high school, a private high school that deals specifically in, it is an alternative school for wealthy children. So the kids can't make their grades and they need to play on the football team. We also dealt a lot with students that had learning disabilities or social anxieties that really couldn't go to larger high schools. So it's very small. I think our student body was a total of about 25 kids.
Oh, wow.
It's very hands-on, maximum 6 kids in a classroom at any one given time. So it's a really nice place to be. And I worked there for a year, and then they offered me an opportunity to continue teaching performing arts and media arts, which was the other class I was teaching, and take over the marketing and communications position. So I did that for a few months, and then the owner was like, hey, we actually really just need a vice principal, like somebody to help the headmaster. And so we're just going to promote you. And I was like, I have zero interest in being a principal. So you should know on my resume, it's going to say marketing communications director, but I'll deal with discipline if that's what you need. And so that's how I was there. And I ended up being at the school for 2 years because it was the perfect thing I needed at the time to really launch my Twitch channel and to get deeper into something that I had found I really loved.
So how long have you been doing Twitch?
2 years.
2 years?
Yeah, a little over 2 years.
You're such a superstar.
Yeah. So it was kind of a weird thing. Like I remember my friend Rim Farr. You guys may know Rim Lee Farr. He's a fantastic writer. If you don't know him, you should go look up his stuff. Really great dude. who I grew up with. We actually grew up together. He reached out to me. I got home for like Christmas and we had like reconnected and we were like sharing old band stories. And he's like, "So what are you doing now?" And I was like, "Well, I've got this podcast, playing some D&D." He's like, "Oh, well, I'm actually writing tabletop stuff." I was like, "That's cool." He's like, "I've got some friends over on Encounter Roleplay and they do a viewer game. You can just sign up and come play some D&D online." I was like, "I don't even know what that's about, but I'm here for it." So I signed up for a random viewer game on ERP, loved it, turned around the next week, did it once more, and then the next season I was GMing it. So like I just kind of found this niche, and so I was with ERP for a while, and I just really got my gears churning. That's where like Roll For It found me. That's how I got involved with Nerd Immersion, and so the more I did it, the more I just loved it. And what I found was that I had kind of left theater behind. I had taken that break, and I was now using skills that I could not get people in the theater community to let me use. I tell people the hardest part about theater as an art form is it's the only one you have to ask permission for.
Yeah.
Think about it. Like if I'm a painter and I want to use fucking yellow paint, I'm going to use yellow paint. But to be an actor, you're constantly asking permission to participate. Constantly.
And not just that. Not just that.
There's a lot of other problems, but that's one of the biggest ones I found from the artist side of things.
Well, I mean, for me, because I started in theater when I was 11 is when I started. And when I joined the Army, right, so I could go to the RADA, because everybody joins the Army to go to the Royal Academy of Shakespeare, clearly, right, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art.
Yeah.
And like that's what you do. And I remember when I went to my first duty station was after training was Korea.
Okay.
And there was no theater there, but there was a band. There was an Army band, the Soldier Show. Okay. And I remember thinking, well, I'm not a singer, but I've done musical theater since I'm 11, so I can act like a singer. Like I can.
Right. All I gotta do, it's just a presence. What most people don't tell you is singing is all about presence. If you believe you're doing a good job, everybody else will.
Like it's true. So it was like, I'll bring out my like 1920s Cole Porter audition song to get in this rock band.
Cole Porter's one of my favorites, actually. I don't really do a lot of musicals, but Cole Porter's my favorite.
I love Cole Porter. And I got in, and so I'm doing this thing, and you know what happened? All of a sudden, I was like, wait a minute. When I'm doing theater, one, I'm not going to get the lead because I'm not the type for a lead.
Yes, correct. I understand the joys of types.
Yeah, I'll get the character actor part, and then when I get the part, I'm not going to be able to do what I want to do most of the time. Thank you, Rissa. I'm going to just have to do what the director tells me. And the director may have interesting ideas about things so you know the ingenue, right?
Oh, don't I?
Most of the time, the thing was really...
nobody ever wanted to cast me as. I was always the boy.
Yeah.
The boy character you best believe Dot was playing it.
Yeah, boy best friend, right?
Yep. Always the boy.
And I was like, I would make a really good ingenue because I would make the ingenue not boring. I would not be like a boring person. I'd be sassy. But they didn't want sassy. They wanted boring. Like those two leads that the soprano, the tenor, what's her face, Joanna and what's his face from Sweeney Todd. Like they're the most boring people, and you could make them interesting, but you never get to do it. And so I never got cast in those things. And then when you get cast, the director has these ideas, and sometimes the directors are a little bit authoritarian, and you don't get to tell the stories you want to tell. And then I'm doing music, and I was like, wait, I get to pick what song I want, and I get to sing it how I want and do what I want? Oh, well, this is more exciting. And I sort of shifted from theater to music because I had more agency. Yeah. And this circles us, I think, back right around to RPGs, because all of a sudden, with RPGs, you don't have a director telling you what you have to do or how you're supposed to play your character. You get to tell stories in a way that's collaborative. You get that theater itch, but you don't have somebody telling you how to be your character.
Yeah, I told somebody one time, they're like, oh, theater's so collaborative. I was like, no, it's not. I show up to a rehearsal hall. You tell me what to say, where to stand, and how to say it.
Yeah.
What about that is collaborative? Just because there are a lot of people on the stage does not make it collaborative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? It does not make it collaborative. The same thing with film.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it is not necessarily. Now, if you're doing device theater or improv, that's a smidge different. Yeah. But when you're working off of a script, I have zero agency around what I wear, how I say things, where I stand. And I was stifled. Yeah. I was doing theater. I wasn't being paid anything most of the time just to do it. But I was doing it, and I had dotted every I, crossed every T, and done everything that they told me from a collegiate standpoint I needed to do to make it as an actress. And I was miserable, right? I had an eating disorder at that point because I thought I needed to be thinner, right? I was in debt because I needed to wear the right clothes and the right shoes. And I had all these expectations of who I was supposed to be to be able to do it. And I was miserable. And it wasn't until I stopped doing it and really started doing some soul searching and going back to like why I wanted to do theater, that I really found that it was about telling stories. And then I found this joyous thing called tabletop RPGs on Twitch, and realized that I could actually tell collaborative stories.
Yeah.
I could actually have agency over a character. I could actually use odd accents and weird things that I had paid a ton of money for in college that I was never going to get to use on a stage somewhere, right? And now, like, okay, prime example. I have a dumb amount of knowledge of weaponry. Dumb. Like a high, stupid, exorbitant amount of knowledge of combat and weaponry, which has about 1 or 2 uses on stage. When you're doing classical theater, that's about it. And as a woman, it has even less because most of the time you don't get to wield a sword.
That's right.
So I had all this knowledge. Now that I'm playing tabletop RPGs, I have all the weapons knowledge that you could possibly ever want, which is relevant and important. And so I'm getting to use all of these skills that I thought really were just going to go to the wayside in a way that is exactly what I had always been looking for.
Yeah.
And it is breath. It is a breath of fresh air. I'll be honest. I'm happier now than I've ever been telling stories.
Atomica notes, Kevin Smith is an example of that. His biggest complaint of his early works, he treated people more as puppets. He might as well have just had his hand inside them because he was so focused on what he wanted. They never let people actually come out and act until around Dogma.
Correct.
And Crellin points out that auteur theory hurts art so much, and it's totally true. And, in my work, I do it's this really weird thing. I work about how is it that a performer can create some kind of an agency within the context where they don't have a lot, right? Yep. And so I think about the ways in which an actor who has to read the words as written and has to stand in that space, how somebody like maybe Marlene Dietrich can just throw in a little bit of sarcasm in her line delivery and undermine the script, right? She's like, yes, I love you very much. And you're like, oh, she doesn't love you.
Oh, she doesn't love you at all. And I think, their acting is for some people. There are a lot of actors that simply find that process exactly what they need. I was not that person. And one of the reasons I started a theater company is because I wanted to start seeing work that I wanted to see. I've never been a musical child. I'm sorry. I don't like musicals. I don't like them because I find that they are not a genuine, honest form of storytelling. Right. But there are good musicals out there. That to be said, like I love Cole Porter, right? Let's just something like Hamilton that is extraordinarily relevant on like every checkbox. Okay. So it's not to say that they're not, and don't think I don't sing musical songs at full throttle riding down the highway. So it's not to say that I don't musical. It's just to say that it was not right for me. And neither were, you can't make a living doing Shakespeare.
No.
I mean, when I moved here, we had 3 Shakespeare companies in Atlanta. We are down to 1.
Really? Oh, and Jer points out, growing up doing Renfest, I got a large taste of character autonomy. And I think this is really interesting. Now, you said, Atomic says, I'm probably going to lynch for this, but I like Chicago. Oh, I like
Chicago too.
Yeah, me too. Now, I think that Bob Fosse has got real self-hatred problems. And kind
a whole separate conversation.
That's a whole separate conversation.
That's a writer problem, let's be real.
That's a writer problem. And it's funny because I believe that we were both in the SCA. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So we both
for many years. I mean, my certification has long since lapsed.
Me too. Like my I'm like, oh, it's so sad.
Oh my God, I'm so far past my certification. But I'll tell you, I still do choreography for film and TV. I grew up in a place where you always had a knowledge of guns. Like I had a gun in my hand at 8. So I have a very comfortable place with like the usage of gun and the safety around it. So I get brought into a lot of sets to train actors in like how to appropriately hold them. What is the safety bits and things about this? I don't do it quite as much anymore, but there was a period of time where I was being regularly called in to choreograph fights.
Wow. This is because you've got a big film industry in Atlanta.
Yeah, huge.
Film and film. Yeah. So there's like a lot there. And it's so interesting. I don't know if you, did you see the and this is going to be kind of weird because I think we can sort of like move into RPGs here for a second in a way, but did you see, I'm sure you've seen the Zeffirelli Romeo and Juliet?
Yes.
So what I loved about that, a couple of things. One, the costumes were amazing. Like, just the costumes were brilliant. But for me, one of the things I really loved was that the fight scenes felt visceral and dangerous. And I find that there are too many classical sort of Shakespeare, etc., or Zorro, etc., where the fighting is clearly Olympic fencing and does not have a sense, it's very balletic, it doesn't have a sense of danger. It's like, oh, I say,
I tell you, it's, I still say this, and I use this term. The man who started me in D&D told me this, and I have held it, and I have kept it, and I use it still to this day in my tabletop games, which is that fights are not there to break the story. They are there to move the story forward. So even when I'm planning like a tabletop game, I will not put you in combat if I do not think it's going to move the story forward. Unnecessary combat is just unnecessary combat, right? The beautiful thing about the fight at the end of Hamlet is that the conversation shouldn't happen around the sword fighting. It should be happening while the sword fighting is happening, because it is a character struggle between two characters. The fighting is simply a metaphor for what's happening between Hamlet and Horatio. Right? It's just this back and forth between them. It is a visual representation of the story that's being told between two characters. And you guys can rip me apart for this in chat all you want. If you are simply dropping combat in there because you feel like your players need combat, you're doing it wrong. And it will slow the progress of your story down, and it will bore your players. Do not put combat in there unless it is absolutely necessary to move the story forward.
For me also, there's a thing about, because I will tell you, some people know, I like crunchy combat, but only if the crunchy combat is good. And I find a lot of crunchy combat isn't actually well done. I want that combat to feel dangerous.
Yes.
Like, I want you to think, ooh, you know what I mean? Like, I might lose an eye. I'm really nervous about this. And like, if we're going to get into combat, I want that combat to have that. Well, Levi asked, is GURPS combat country? It can be. And I mean, basically, I want you to feel like, oh no, I'm
stakes.
Yeah, I want there to be
stakes.
And I think that sometimes, Barentor says D&D unfortunately mechanically wants combat a lot, and it's bad. And for me, the problem with D&D combat, which has always been a little bit frustrating, is that when you're first level, you just might die. And there's not much you can do about it. And by the time you get to high level, then you're probably not going to die. You can jump off a cliff and you'll be fine.
Right, and you're doing all kinds of crazy things. But, it's one of my biggest complaints about D&D. When I really started doing this, and I played a lot of D&D, a lot for a long time when I first started streaming on Twitch. Like, there was a solid year where all I was playing was D&D. And then I played a Cypher system game.
Which one?
And I was like, it was a one-off Cypher system that Marcy Velen ran. And I was like, holy crap. My entire story doesn't have to be based on combat. It's not all about fighting things. We didn't even have a combat. It was all story. I was jaw-dropped. And I realized that as much as all of you at home want to deny it, D&D is a combat-based gameplay.
Oh, it is. I mean,
it is. The books are built around combat. Your spells are built around combat. Your characters are built around combat. So it always blows my mind when people are like, oh, I'm really looking for, I want to tell a story. I'm going to use D&D, but I'm going to tell the story that's a little less about, and I'm like, why use D&D? There are 1,000 RPGs out there that are not based around combat. D&D is not the be all and end all. And be praised if he strikes me down right now. Like, I get it. And this is coming from the girl who was out at, D&D live in LA. I love D&D. It's where it started. But it has a very specific purpose. And there are so many other RPGs that are so story-based and that offer so many more opportunities. And
let's be fair, you can do it, but that's not what the system is built for. And 5th edition has come a long way from first, and they've added more things in, but it's you know what I mean? The system is like, I was thinking about how in some games it's like my home system is GURPS, and there are not a lot of adventures for GURPS, and people say, well, it's really hard because you don't know what the players can do, right? Like, I could make a GURPS character that is an accountant and has no combat skills at all is an accountant, and I can make that character pretty easily in GURPS. And how do you make an adventure when you might have people who have no combat skills at all? And in D&D, you never have that problem because you know that all the characters are combat.
Something that's combat related. Even your stats for the character are based on usually combat. Yeah. It's one of the reasons why I love Fate so much. Fate is one of my favorite systems because you can build just an average person in Fate. I mean, I ran an entire campaign, this was about a year ago now, based on the movie Anchorman.
I saw it was amazing.
They played Anchormen.
It was great.
They didn't have special abilities or powers. They were just Anchormen in the 70s in the city of Philadelphia. Well, I say that. They were the production crew of the Anchor team in Philadelphia. And it was a brilliant story. It was absolutely one of my most favorite campaigns I've ever played. Why? Because it wasn't about combat. Like, they had to do some things here or there, but it was about them mitigating a world. It was a world experiment for me. And most of my favorite system campaigns are like one of my favorite movies was always The Brave Little Toaster. And I remember that so vividly. And I always wanted there to be a game where I could play an appliance. And so I was like, well, screw it. Fate core is perfect. Like I ran the Fate of the Anchorman campaign, and then I turned around and like less than 6 months later, I had developed another game that was all about like a post-apocalyptic world where when the nuclear bombs dropped, the nuclear energy animated appliances. So humans turned into these monsters, but now all my players got to play an appliance in this world where they're trying to understand and mitigate what is basically post-apocalyptic times. And it was also a brilliant campaign because it was so different.
Yeah.
When you're a label maker, you can't fight things. You're just a label maker.
So Mr. Awful McPherson says, I love GMing horror stories because it causes people new to the paranormal, and needing to adopt their mundane skills to this world. I will say there was something I think was really interesting, and it was so there's an RPG called A Good Society, which is you know it. So they're going to come out with a guide to changing it, right? To hacking it yourself. And I have an idea for a hack for A Good Society.
Oh, cool.
That Levi says you'd be great on. And it is the Jersey Shore hack. Because in the Jersey Shore, they do the testimonials, right? And that's so that's like the letter writing spot where you do the testimonials.
I love that. We have to do the testimonial.
Yeah, and of course there's all about like reputation. I just think it'd be really good.
So much fun.
Just like a really good one shot of like the Jersey Shore Good Society. I think it would be amazing. One thing I think is interesting, and this is like to get back into combat for a moment. I was playing a GURPS game that was, the whole point of it was to really test out the new martial arts rules. So it was set in 1820 in France, and we were all fencing students. So it was like going to be super, super heavy combat. Well, for us, which was not necessarily, I mean, you know.
Right.
But what was amazing is that the way that the GURPS rules, especially with the sort of expanded rules, allowed me to tell who my character was as a specific individual through combat choices in a way that D&D never lets me do. So, for example, in GURPS, you have once per combat round, you can retreat. Once. And that retreat is very meaningful because if you get hit, it's really bad for you. And you can retreat backwards. And my character was overconfident and tended to think well of his skills, even though he was not that skilled. And so I decided that he would never retreat backwards because he thought he was too good for that. That if he was going to retreat at all, he'd move forward. And that caused him in a fight to get a big club to his knee, crippled his leg. And so then he was Salarm. He was out. He was not able to fight for a couple of months in game time, and he also got addicted to laudanum. He got over it, but the point is that there was this moment where I was able to sort of think about this character. I think would not. There was a way to express who this person's inner person was through a combat experience, and then have bad consequence for it, which was great. It was like the best thing ever, and I never feel like I can really express in my individual self through D&D. Like, not my individual self, but my character's individual self through D&D. Because, like, all rogues basically kind of do the same thing. But, like, you don't know if, like, what if my character is hesitant? Or what if they are, you know, overconfident? Or what if this combat moment should... Like, I don't want to hurt people, so I want to maybe knock people unconscious. There's a way in which very, very often the combat doesn't give you the chance to express... like the inner core of your character, and that makes me sad.
Yeah, it's just definitely, it is a very specific system, and obviously most people start in D&D.
Yeah, of course.
They just do. It's the market standard, it's tabletop standard, and really is that perfect intro, I think, into tabletop. It allows you to understand framework and concept of character and how to tell a story. But for those of you at home that have never played another tabletop game, do it. Pick one up. Be bold, because I think what it does is it makes your D&D games better. My D&D games have only gotten better. I actually played a game, it's been a few months now since it closed out. I feel like it was right before the end of the year, over with Pro Restarter. He had restarted, he's like, hey, I need a GM that wants to play a D&D game. And I was like, I need you to know, I'm D&D out. Will you let me do what I want to? And of course, Pro was like, yeah, of course. And I was like, great, you're all going to be adolescents. We'll start as 0 level characters with no class, a race. You're a child. So pick your race, and you're going to be the adolescent version of that. And what I found most interesting is that the D&D books talk about aging. Like they'll say, okay, a gnome will age at the race of a human up to a certain point, and then it, right? But they don't talk about what it is to be an adolescent, you know, elf. Like, what does it mean to not be 100 damn years old? What if you're just 20 years old as an elf? What does it mean for you? And so we played this whole game where they started out as 0 level characters, and part of the story that we told was them actually gaining their class through story, through having to just be normal ass children that are dealing with adult level concept. I added a mechanism called the innocence bar. Basically, it was like, as a kid, you have a high level of innocence because you view the world differently. But as you do things like have to drink and sneak into a bar and see a naked woman and kill someone, these things change you, and they age you, and they take away that innocence. And when that happens, what does it mean for your character? So I try really hard to break D&D because it's like a personal goal of mine on a regular basis. I think I could never have gotten to that and run a campaign like that, which I would like to say is probably one of my most successful D&D campaigns, at least from my perspective, if I had not branched out and done other gaming.
So this is something I talk about sometimes on my Discord, but for me, and this is something that for me, one of the biggest problems for me with Dungeons and Dragons is the habit of not giving players a frame, right? D&D assumes a frame, and that frame is you're adventurers, and like often people will say, hey, we're going to play D&D, make a first level character, and then you'll just sort of like meet at an end, and it's very like, okay, I remember I was in a campaign once and somebody made a pirate, somebody made there's these disparate people who had no reason to be together. It was fairly contrived, and we're just like, we're going adventuring. We're
doing some things,
right? But for me, one of the, I'm interested in having a frame, right? So that frame might be that you're the production crew of an Anchorman news station, right? That's a frame. Make a character. Like, as a GM, I will give you some constraints in your character creation.
We're all the appliances off this cul-de-sac.
Right. You do that. Or your idea, you're all adolescents in this D&D world. So not just like we're going to play D&D, like how about instead, we talk about elves in the forest, right? I want you to make a character who is in this particular elven forest separatist nation. You don't have to be an elf, but we're going to start at this most holy day in this forest. That's where we're going to start. So be a person who's going to be at this most holy day in this forest, in this small elven nation that is really not, that sort of is a little bit separate. And you can be a human druid who lives there. You can be whatever you want, but this is going to be the setup. And from there, we're going to come up with something really interesting. And the idea of, because for me, because I like to, like you're an improvisatory GM.
Yes.
And I'm also an improvisatory GM, but the way that I make the improv, and I love player agency. Like, I'm super into players having agency to do a lot of things. But the way that I make that work is by making sure that before we start the game, we are all on the same page, so that we all know what we're doing, and that we have a an idea, a core, and so that then from there you can improvise to where the space. So we've all agreed that we're all appliances, or that we're all child mages, or
right. I mean, I even did that with our Scum and Villainy campaign that we're currently in. I was like, you're all traveling together as this group under this and this and this thing. I could have simply said, "Oh, you guys are a bunch of mercenaries. Have fun with it." But I find, it's one of the things that I actually learned about art school, which is that creatives actually work better when you give them a framework.
That's right.
When you say, here's a blank canvas, go, an artist is like, but if I'm like, I want you to create something that plays with line and color and needs to have two-dimensionality or three-dimensionality, an artist can instantly, right? So it's actually one of the issues that a lot of artists have, and I think is a detriment to them when they're in a collegiate setting, which is that every project that you get is going to have a framework. This is a color theory project. This is a X, Y, and Z project. And so we build with prompts. We build with framework, as you put it. And then when we hit the real world and we don't have that, we have to create from scratch, from nothing. A lot of artists freeze and we stop making.
Atomica says, one of my better stories started with, you're all musketeers for the king, you're on a diplomatic mission. Just that little bit let them build such a cohesive unit as opposed to a random gathering.
Correct.
And and I really think, I've done a musketeers campaign, although they were the Cardinals Guard. And I just think, and I'm really fascinated by different setups. So, for example, in the Scum and Villainy campaign, the Purloin Code that I'm a player in, which is on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. over on Little Red Dots channel with underscores, and it's brilliant. The setup was not just that we are a member of this crew, which, by the way, I think is really great. That it's fascinating to me that sci-fi RPGs almost always assume some kind of a framework where fantasy ones often don't. And I'm like, hey, but not only were we a member of this crew, you also said, we're going to start with you having finished a mission and stranded in space with your oxygen running out. And I was like, oh, that's great. Here's this
stakes. There are those stakes. I was like, raise them. We need to start up here.
Yes. But also, what a great evocative moment, right? And I remember there was a setting that I did, and I'm really interested in myself, never getting paid. We're not going to get paid. Maybe we'll get paid. We probably won't get paid. Maybe. One of the things, I'm really interested in different kinds of setups for a campaign. And one of the ones that I did that I really loved, it was for a short run like yours, like a good a 4-part, was I said, okay, there's this man. His name is Barry Nuss. And he is the CFO for an international mining corporation, and he lives in a penthouse in New York City. Here's a picture of him. I would like you to make someone who is related to him in some way. And
interesting.
You can decide whatever that is, and whatever you decide is going to shape in some ways who this person is. And so the first person who chimed in said, okay, I'm his wife. I'm a high-functioning alcoholic. I'm super rich, right? I'm on the board of a whole bunch of charitable organizations and museums.
Yeah.
And
as much like luxury wives do.
Yeah, like a luxury wife, and also very unfulfilled in my life. And I was like,
right, of course, as most are.
Right, and then someone else says, okay, I am a young choreographer in New York City, and I am his only true love. That we had an affair in college. And he left me because he had to do all of this sort of famous stuff and like official things. Oh, and I was like, oh, okay. And someone else was like, I'm his father who's running for governor in California. And I was like, okay. And so we got this setup.
It's like politics campaign.
Right. And then, of course, we start with him going missing.
Interesting.
And then it sort of goes through this whole thing. But that was for me, that was real. I was like, okay, how about if your start is that you all know the same person? What about if your start is you're all in the same location at this one moment in you're on the Titanic? Okay, what if your start is and I'm trying to think what are all the different ways that I can start a campaign that will give us really different inspirations for making a character, right?
Yeah. And I think, even one of the things since I started doing, so you should know when I launched my Twitch channel, it was for cosplay. My very first Twitch streams were actually me making a Darth Vader helmet.
Oh, wow.
For DragonCon. That's kind of where I got started. And that's when Rim was like, hey, you've got a Twitch channel and all the gear. You should just hop over to ERP and play some Dungeons and Dragons. And here we are. And actually, I'm getting ready to do more cosplay now that I've got a real setup space. So that's coming your direction. But nice. I started in, a very different place. but I say that because as I've started to put more tabletop on my channel, one of the things that I've challenged myself as a GM to do is to play around with structure. So not everything has to be a giant campaign, right? So I always run an extended campaign of like 8 weeks. That's currently like the Witch Girl slot because that's what Patreon loves. And then I do what I call mini campaigns, which are 4, now 5 possibly, like the Anchorman campaign, the Fate of the Appliance Wars campaign. All of those were mini campaigns, 4 games, right? And that also gives an interesting like structure to me as a GM, because I think one of the things I really love is like we only tell the story we can tell.
Yeah.
I think there's this expectation that like we have to close a story out and it's got to be like Critical Role and it needs to be brilliant and heartfelt and poignant. It needs to hit me in the chest. And it's like sometimes you're just a bunch of production people working for, you know, Channel 2 Action News, and you need to just find your anchorman by 6 p.m. Right? Stories don't have to be this big.
Yeah.
My day today was a story.
Yeah.
I got up, I went to work, I spilled coffee on my dress. I had a very long day. I got out of work late. And just the trajectory from leaving work to get here in and itself is a story. And I think that there's this expectation that story has to be this like giant arc. It needs to have this high structure. And I, as a GM, am expected to tell this very poignant story. Sometimes it's just not going to be that. And that's okay. I tell my players all the time, we end where we end.
So this is really interesting because if you think about like the different trends of gaming, right? Like there's the old Forge thought about gamist, simulationist, and narrativist, and gamist being more challenge focused, right? Sort of rules balance. That's what you're doing. And the narrativist being the more sort of modern stuff, what's about big arcs and stories and themes. And then simulationist of being about more exploring, seeing what happens. And I've been that middle one, that exploration one, where I am not generally going to force an epic 5-act structure unless that's what everybody wants. But I would rather not plan a 5-act structure and then hopefully we can get there. I'm interested in just seeing what happens. For me, and this is so interesting, I was thinking about spoilers. Janice in Purloin Code last night shot a military colonel commander in the head.
On the military base.
On the military base with cameras. And, right. And the thing is, for me, as a player and a GM, I love that is now the story, right? That is the story of what happened.
I could not have planned for that.
And I like being able to, like, for me, I was always thinking about, so there was this question, somebody said, well, but you wouldn't have the heroes die in the first episode, right? Like, and I was like, well, if they do, that's the, like, because they said, because if that happens, the story ends. And I said, well, no, the story changes, right?
Yeah, it just shifts. For example, I'm in a Game of Thrones game right now. And I had a character who was a Dornish ambassador. She was very, she came from a family that worshipped snakes. They have a giant snake pit in Dorne. And she was sent because she is mitigating a contract, or she was mitigating a contract for both the merging of the naval fleets with a Riverlands house called the Rook family, but she's all by doing that through the marriage of her younger brother to the oldest daughter of this family. Well, it just so happens when she got there, she fell in love with the eldest daughter, and they'd been having an affair for quite a while. And so, yeah, right. And so my character's been having this secret affair with the eldest daughter of this house who's supposed to marry her younger brother in about 5 years' time.
Oh, awkward.
And so I knew that my character was destined for nothing good in Game of Thrones. Yeah. I knew that. But I didn't expect her to either die, be killed, or have to go home or be found out. She also had another giant secret, which is that she killed her eldest brother, who was basically a Joffrey type. Oh, yeah. In his sleep. And then she became a bit distraught and slit her own throat, but she survived. And the family thought it was an attack on the children. And so she's lived with this huge burden her whole life. So anyways, all this story to be said, it came out far too soon, like 6 episodes in, that she was in one episode that not only had she killed her own brother, she slit her own throat, but she was also sleeping with the eldest daughter of the house, all in one episode.
Ouch.
And the GM was like, I don't know what to do. The rest of the players were like, here it is the information. And I literally, he emailed me at the break, and he was like, or messaged me at the break, the GM, and was like, you should prep a new character for next time. This is how this is going to be. And I loved Luvina Sand.
Yeah, she was amazing.
She's one of my favorite characters. She had one of the best wigs.
She did. Her wig was amazing.
I've ever purchased. And I was distraught. Like, as a player, I was like, no, it's too soon. Like, she's not supposed to go yet. But it's not for me to tailor that story. It's for me to recognize now the story's just shifted.
That's right.
So after a lot of conversation with the GM, I was like, he's like, well, talk to me about her backstory. How can we write you a new character, basically? I was like, I really just want to be Dornish. Like, my Leonard Ginger self really just wants a tan and beautiful olive skin and a great accent, okay? And he was like, so we got to talking about it. Well, when she slit her own throat, there was a maester of their house who saved her and raised her for 3 years when she couldn't speak. Well, that maester is now a true maester of the Citadel. So now I'm playing Maester Raphael, who saved Luvina Sand and knows all of her secrets. So it was actually a really great way for me to bring in a character from Luvina's backstory. So just as you said, it didn't stop the story just because Luvina Sand wasn't there. For about 24 hours, I thought my life was over, for real. Like, I was distraught over Luvina going away. But it also opened a lot of opportunities for me. And now I get to continue to tell Luvina's story via this other character. You know, like when people bring up Luvina's name, Maester Raphael has known her since she was a little girl. He's known her since he had to patch her throat up, right? Like, there's a deep-seated history there, and it's made the story ever richer. And ever more interesting. And
it's interesting because, and this is like, I'm thinking about sort of how do we think of what a story is, right? And for me, this is just where I'm at, right? For me, people will sometimes say, oh, you know, RPGs, it's like a radio play, or, you know, RPGs, it's like a film, or it's like a TV show, or it's like this. And I was like, no, it's its own thing, right?
Yeah, it's different.
It's different. And I always think you can try to, okay, you know when you watch a movie and the movie is an adaptation of the book, but it's too faithful, but a book is like 1,000 pages and a film is like 2 hours. 2 hours. And it doesn't really do a good job. You're like, oh, that wasn't very good. The films that do adaptation really well are ones that realize they're a different medium and do something different. And for me, I think that there are things you can do in an RPG, story-wise, that you cannot do in any other medium at all, including telling narrative arcs, like the way the story goes, that you would never get in any other kind of medium.
I joke with people, you know, that the intro to Powerpuff Girls, sugar, spice, and everything nice. These are the ingredients. And then, what is it? Chemical X. Chemical X is what makes a tabletop. What makes it different, right? I tell people all the time, the really beautiful thing about tabletop RPGs is it takes two things that have been in humanity since we were cavemen around a fire, right? Gaming and storytelling. We have been playing games and telling stories since we could build a fire and sit around with other humans. It is something that is deeply embedded in our cultural history, not just on where we grew up or what continent we're from, but deeply embedded in the history of humanity. And RPGs take those two things and they bring them together. And that is something special. That is something that you're not going to find on a stage. That is something that you're not even going to find in improv. Right. And I work for an improv house now. I do marketing for a very large improv house here in Atlanta. I believe wholeheartedly in improv and its place, but it is not like that. It is sugar, spice, everything nice, and then chemical X.
Do you know one of the things I love about RPGs? Failure. I love that the dice or whatever mechanic you have can mean that you don't get what you want. Because how do you know if you're a real hero, right? You know what I mean? Or, until you're challenged with things that you don't get, right?
Right, the hard choices.
The hard choices. And I will tell you, I'm sometimes a mean GM, not really, but just in my own way, when I get to do my own thing, where there'll be moments where it doesn't matter what your skills are. You have to decide, do you want this or do you want this? And you cannot have them both. And which one you pick will tell me and you something about your character, and it's not about the die roll at that moment. And it could be, right? Hello, kitty.
There's my baby.
But I mean, like, there was a moment where this was like this moment that it was like, I was like, okay, and I never know the answer, right? I was running the Musketeers campaign where the characters were, their job was to be bodyguards for this diplomat. They were going to take this diplomat from France to Spain, where the diplomat would negotiate France's entrance into the 30 Years' War on the side of Spain. Super easy, slam dunk. They're both Catholic nations. It should be fine.
Right, easy peasy.
Easy peasy. When they get there, monks show up trying to kill this diplomat, which is weird. And the diplomats, the negotiations are going very poorly, and no one quite knows why, because it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And so they're trying to protect this diplomat, and there's some combat with the protection, and all of a sudden it's just a little bit too weird for them, because at one point in time the monk gets through and is going to kill this diplomat, and all of a sudden a piece of masonry just falls on this monk and kills the monk. That was weird. And they're like, something's strange. So they find out, they basically discover that there's been a prophecy that this diplomat is the Antichrist and is going to change the world as they know it. And these monks are sworn to kill this diplomat. So they're now presented with this challenge. They've been sworn to protect this diplomat, but these monks say this diplomat is really bad news.
Right.
And I was like, okay, what are they going to do? One of the members was actually secretly a priest that was spying for the Vatican, could have done an exorcism, but decided not to reveal that he was actually a priest, so didn't do it. And the players decided not to do anything, to let this like demon do whatever it was going to do, because their honor was more important to them than stopping this demon. And I was like, that's a choice. Okay.
Wow. Unexpected one for sure.
Unexpected. I didn't know. And so in the end, the negotiations break down. France does not join Spain on the Spain side. They come back, and when they get back, the demon's like, heh, heh, and then leaves the body. And so what ends up happening is that France enters in on the other side, which is what actually happened historically. War comes to France in this way that's going to be devastating, and they have to live every time they see people sort of fighting in war with the knowledge that they could have maybe stopped it or changed it, but they didn't. And
they didn't.
And that becomes the new campaign, and that was not a campaign that I planned, and that is not the story that you would, if this were a book, that was not how it would have happened, right? Because the heroes, they do the thing, but they all became like, what happened to those characters was so interesting because they all lived with this in guilt, and that guilt drove all of their actions from then on in a way that I would never have been able to plan. And that was like, that sort of failure to stand up to evil in that moment defined their goals and drives for the rest of the campaign in a way that was amazing. And I never could have planned that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I couldn't have planned you shooting the Colonel in the head last night. You know, like my Witch Girls campaign started out as a 4-part mini. We were just testing content. And Renee Rhodes, who I'm sure all of you know, who's an incredible role player, she and I had kind of been working together, and something happened. And she made a choice in the very last part of the 4th episode that literally we got done, and the rest of the girls were like, we can't, this isn't the end, right? And I was like, she made that choice. She chose to go against all of you. Your sister, your coven witch chose to go against you and made this choice. And it has affected everything in our new campaign. Everything. Their entire drive is to save her, but what they don't realize is she made a choice. Yeah. She chose to be bad. Yeah. She chose that. And it was so impactful. It's one of those moments that you can't write, you can't plan for. And it's that magic that we look for in theater. It's that magic that we look for when we go to see a movie or to read a book. But as it was just so beautifully said in chat, those things are already there. They're already completed. In a tabletop RPG, nothing is completed. My job as a GM is not to write a story. My job as a GM is to build a world in which your characters can thrive. And I just facilitate you through it. And I think that a lot of GMs make the mistake of I've got to plan a campaign that's what are you planning? My campaign planning for the Purloin Quid is the most I've ever done because I was building a guild that had some very strict structure to it. But all in all, most of the time I'm here is the world. It is the 1970s. Anchormen reign supreme, and you're all a production crew underneath them. Go, right? Or like with Fate of the Appliance Wars, the apocalypse happened.
Yeah.
Each of you were just normal ass appliances, and now you have sentient life, which means you're actually only about 4 years old.
Yeah.
You're newborns, baby. Right? And this is what's happening. Humans are all but gone, and what's left of them eat other humans and sentient appliances. And when you build just a structure for a world and you give it to players, they are going to tell their own story. And I think as a GM, you have to learn to let some of that control go. You have to. Last night, I could have easily looked at the character of Genesis and said, no, you can't shoot him.
Yeah.
Or I could have put 1,000 things in his way to make that not happen.
Yeah. But
I didn't. Because it made for a more interesting story. It added conflict between all of you, and it's not my place to tell you what to do with your character.
So, but here's the funny thing, because we're talking and we're grooving, right?
Right.
But that's because we are a particular style of GM that is sort of similar. And what's interesting is that, and I was talking about this in Discord, there are a lot of players who do not want that responsibility, and they do not want that agency. They want to sit back and be told a really good, exciting story. Like, they want that arc. They want that traditional sort of filmic cinematic narrative where they want to be strapped into the roller coaster, and they want that story. They want that adventure path. They don't want the responsibility of having to drive narrative at all. They want the GM to do all of that work. That's a lot of work. It's
a lot of work, and it's really not fair. If you think about it. Mm-hmm. I think we have been spoiled by the Dungeons and Dragons campaign.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, here I am. I have, where is it? Somewhere over here. I was gifted. Oh, here it is. I was gifted the Goats of Saltmarsh.
Mm-hmm.
Not opened this. Wizards gave me this. I've not opened it yet because this is a story pre-written.
Mm-hmm. And think I'm playing in that campaign right now, and I'm doing my thing, right? I'm like, okay, let me make a character, because that's what I always do. I'm like, I'm going to make a character that I think will be interesting.
Right.
But and I think that's the thing, is that there are a lot of players, that's exactly what they want, right? They want a story.
Okay.
They want to be in the Lord of the Rings, right? They want to be Bilbo, and they want that story.
They want start to finish.
They want the start to finish. And there's nothing wrong with it, but I think that for me, and I was talking about this, that what's really tricky is that there are a lot of players who have never developed the skills to be in an open story, because they've never been taught that. If they've only played D&D with modules their entire gaming life, they've developed the skills of how to follow a module well, but they've not developed the skills on how to break out of a module well.
Correct.
And so there's a way in which you kind of have to teach. You have to teach players that they can do those things if they've never experienced.
Right. And, there are a few ways. You're right. There are just some players that are really, really set in this.
Or they just don't have the experience.
Or they just don't have the experience. And that's okay. And I think you as a GM, it's part of your job as facilitator.
That's right.
Your job
Mm-hmm.
to recognize those and help people through it.
That's right.
I tell I'm a role player. I can start a campaign and as a GM or a game, a session, and stay in NPCs and characters the whole time.
Yeah.
That being said, there are ways thank you, to help players along. Some players are not going to talk to you they're not going to be active communicators. Some characters just don't talk that much.
Yeah.
I'm a dot. I talk a lot. Not everybody's like that. Not all characters are going to be that way. So I've learned to develop a set of skills as a GM where, if I hear a player or see a player that's really taking a major step back from the table, or they're not really interacting, I look at them and I say, how is your character feeling in this moment, right? Mm-hmm. Because some characters feel more than they exclaim.
Yeah.
Some players feel more than they exclaim. And by having a player talk about how our character's feeling can help prompt everybody else to better understand, to collaborate more, to do things differently. I think there are a lot of other things that you can do. One of the things I think we look over a lot, specifically in D&D, is leveling up.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just wake up one day and have new powers.
Yeah.
You just don't. I'm sorry. It just doesn't work that way. Like, you don't just go to bed and wake up and today I know how to X, Y, and Z. So one of the huge things that you get when you run a D&D campaign with me is when we level up, there is an entire piece of our session that is a talking through what does leveling up look like? What does it look like to put new spells in your spell book? Let's narrate through a scene of what it means to be a druid, and now you can control trees where before all you could do was make good berries. Okay, like there are aspects that you as a GM can do to help your players let go of some of that and go deeper and farther. I can hear so many of my acting teachers that are like, go deeper, Chelsea, go deeper. And when I was in school as an actor, it just used to piss me off. I'm like, what do you mean? I've learned my lines. I have purpose. I'm making stakes. Like, but now as a GM, I realize what my directors were trying to tell me. They're trying to say to let go a little bit, like let go of needing to have that structure of knowing your lines. You know what you need to know. Now make some bold choices. And I think you as a GM sometimes have to help your characters. If I'm at your table, don't worry. I'll make choices, and more than likely, you're going to have to ask me to rein it in a little bit. But I recognize that not everybody's like that. So I, as a GM, want to make people feel comfortable. But I also want to give them opportunity. Things like flashbacks. One of my favorite campaigns that I've played with Trooper was an origin story. It was a 4-part campaign. They played superheroes, but they didn't play just superheroes from start to finish. It was about how they got to their super status. They didn't actually get to play superheroes. It was about the origin. The 4 parts was just about starting as normal as people in a diner and getting to the point of having powers and realizing what that means for them moving forward to be a superhero. That is a different kind of story that asks your players to think differently. You don't have superpowers yet. You're just coping with the fact that now you've kind of been, had toxic stuff all over your body and some weird shit's happening to you. So I don't know. I could go through a full set of tools as a GM that you could use to help incentivize your characters to break free of a hard, what I call linear story.
Do you know one of the things that I do to help on this one? Because again, I have found that especially people are coming from a D&D background, getting them to understand that they have agency is one of the challenges, because I think they just don't necessarily believe that they have it. And so one of the things that I do is, it depends on the setting, but I will have, I like to call it days of consequence, where there'll be like a session where mostly it's just the fallout, positive and negative, for the things they've done that may not seem to may not have seemed important, right? But like they did a really nice thing to somebody, and now they can see that this one woman has now, because they helped her out in this way, she's been able to start a shop, and this means like let them see that they actually impact the world. Because I think that one of the problems is that when you're running off of a module, you don't really impact the world so much because you've got to get to the end. And
because your world is also this big.
Yeah, because your world is that big. And I want them to see that, oh, actually, hey, like there was a campaign I was running where they actually kind of started a coup in this country. They destabilized the government, and then it caused a bit of a revolution. It was a sci-fi game, and they had no idea, because they really did. It was already a bit of a volatile situation, and they just like destabilized, and they didn't realize, like they were like, oh, we just want this thing. In order to get it, we're going to undermine the president. It's fine. And then there was a revolution, and they're like, oh, whoa.
Oh my. Yeah.
and from that moment it clicked, and they're like, oh, I think they were afraid of messing up my game. Right?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, you can't mess up my game because it's our game.
It's not my game. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not my game. I think also, too, there's a point where a lot of players don't realize that the choices you make affect the world.
That's right.
That's also a lesson that a lot of people learn. It's like, oh, well, if you're going off a module, no matter what I do, I'm just going to end up killing the dragon. We're going to move to the next page.
That's right.
But what if it's not like that? So I don't use modules very frequently. I use modules for a lot of inspiration. I'm not going to lie to you about that. I read a lot of modules for inspiration. Specifically in the D&D realm, but I like to consider myself a world builder. That's what I do. One of my other favorite D&D campaigns I ever ran, one day I'll write it up, but I haven't actually written the world yet. Setting really is better. It's called the Galleria at Grunrundi. If you've been watching me since I started on Twitch, this was one of the first campaigns I ran on ERP, and I appreciate Will giving me the opportunity, because when I pitched it to him, it sounded like a ridiculous fucking idea. So when I pitched the idea, it was the holidays. I hate Christmas with the fiery passions of just burnings of hell.
Is it the
Because
tinsel?
it's consumerism, just
Yeah.
garbage.
Yeah.
And it goes against many of the personal things that I hold in my life, like decommodification
Yeah.
and those kind of things. But I hate the holidays. And so I got terribly inspired by this deep-seated hatred of commercialized United States to write this campaign called the Galleria at Grundrundy. And it is basically the most giant shopping complex in all of Faerun. It's built inside of an old repurposed dwarven catacomb on the interior of this mountain. There are 11 districts. Each district serves a different thing. But what you don't realize is when you come in and you sign the contract, you basically don't have a way out.
Wow.
And so you get into this giant facility where there are people trying to sell you stuff. There's a food court district, and all these things are happening. All I did was build the Galleria. I was like, here are the 11 districts. Here are different shops in the districts. And what all of you as players do once you get on the inside and realize you're fucking trapped is on you. How you get out is on you. And so what actually turned out is there's a sleeping gold dragon that has been corrupted at the core of the mountain. And it has been, its sickness has seeped, the greed has seeped into everybody here. And so people can't leave the Galleria because they just want more money, more things, more stuff. And you as a player have to start contend with the fact that you are getting sick. And how do you escape? And so it became this like really interesting concept for me, and was really the first time I think as a GM where I left that concept of linear story behind. And I was like, it's the place, and you're now trapped, and what you do in it is up to you.
Yeah.
And it freaks some of my players out.
You need really good players for that. You know what I mean? Like people who are really ready for it.
Yeah, really. And you know what's funny? It was actually a viewer game, which means I had new people every week too. I had 2 players that were constant, but everybody else was new, which worked out because you're in a giant shopping complex with hundreds of thousands of people. And but you're trying to make your way through a world that is trying to take from you.
Yeah.
You know, it's trying to take everything it can, and all you're trying to do is take back. And there's this constant pull that happens. And it was just a really fun campaign. Like I said, one day I'll write it up as a setting book that's just there.
Amazing.
And you can have it and use it. But it it was the first time I think as a GM where I really let go of the reins and I said, this is not about some story. This is not about like an endpoint. I don't know how this is going to end. I don't know if all of you are going to be trapped for life in the Galleria.
And I personally, as a GM, I like not knowing what's going to happen because that becomes fun for me, right? Like if I know that's not, there was a jazz musician, it was Ornette Coleman, I think, who was doing free jazz, right? So some people are like, what is that free jazz? Like, bah. And he said, if I play a C one time and I played a C a second time, why does it have to be the same C? I've already played it. Like, what's the point of that, right? Like this idea that you can really free up, right? I wanted to say this other thing. I was thinking about GM tips, and this is relevant to Purloin Code last night, is that people do backgrounds, right? They do these character backgrounds or they don't. And one of the things I think is really interesting for me is as a GM, I like to ask players a question maybe each week to get them to think about their character. And one of the questions I like to ask, especially in D&D, is, first session, has your character ever killed anyone before?
That's a good one.
I want to know, have you? And if so, what was the circumstance? Because if you haven't, the first time somebody kills somebody in D&D, I want you to have already known that this is the first time this has ever happened.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about Dev, and Dev has never killed anyone before, but I also don't think he's ever seen anyone killed.
At least not at that close of range.
No. And I think, so he was in the military, but I think he was a pilot, right? He was like... Right, he was in pilot school for a while. He was in training. He didn't jive really well. So then he was a pilot.
And the concept of war in it's not really something that's around. So it's not like he would have been in front lines or anything like that. Yeah, military is there to keep the peace.
Right, and I imagine that he was a pilot. He was a little bit too mean for him in certain ways, and so he left. But I don't think he's never killed anyone, and I don't think he was ever in a situation where that happened. And so for me, knowing that was being a thing that I think about, I think, okay, how is this going to affect my character Dev? That he just saw someone get murdered right in front of his face.
Point blank,
2 feet away, and it was not even prepared. Like, it was a surprise, and he was not prepared for it. And I think that is a question I want people to think. Hey, has your character ever gotten into a fist fight? Have you ever been hit before?
Yeah.
And the answer for Deb is yes, he has been hit before. He's been beat up pretty badly. But
Oh, sure. Bullied. Yeah.
Yeah, but like some characters may have never have been beat before. So the first time you take a hit in a combat, how does that make you feel? And so like I'm interested in some of those questions so that you can then go deeper and maybe start thinking about your character in ways like let's say you're a first level D&D fighter.
Yeah.
But you've never actually been in a fight before. How do you deal with that first moment when there's like a little goblin army coming at you? You might freak out.
One of the things I ask my players, this is a D&D specific thing, and I actually, when I read the 5th edition player's guide for the first time, it is in the player's handbook, and I bring it up because most people look right over it, which is that you are an adventurer.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't just wake up one day and pick up a sword unless you really want that to be your background. Just like with the kids, started at you didn't have a class.
Yeah.
A few levels ago. So what got you to here? What got you to a 3rd level?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you start adventuring? Why? And a lot of people are like, I can write this giant backstory about how I was an orphan and, my mother abandoned me and I have all these issues. And it's like, but that doesn't make you an adventurer.
That's right. You could just be back in your hometown and miserable.
Like you could just be like the rest of us.
Yeah.
So the real question is what makes you an adventurer?
Mm-hmm.
Long ago, when I was struggling in my acting and had kind of given up film and TV, I did a lot of web series, and I worked with a group here in Atlanta. I'll tell you guys, and you can have fun going and trying to find it online. We did a sci-fi series called Star Command. In the 2nd season of Star Command. But then we turned around after Star Command, and they wrote this really brilliant web series called what is it called? Anyways, it comes from the perspective, basically, it makes fun of fantasy and gaming and LARPing, and it comes from the perspective of the everyday people. They call them scavengers. And it's this group of women that go around and follow adventurers and wait for them to die. Then they take all of their gear and then wait for the heroes to repopulate. And then they sell them back their gear at a raised price. And so this whole first season follows these 4 women. Oh gosh, what was it called? I'll have to look it up for you guys before I go. I played an elven queen, basically, but these 4 women, the first season is about them they have all this gear and stuff, and something happens, and the heroes are they're all assholes. They are the worst kind of people, and they're just terrible. And a little girl goes missing, and none of the heroes are like, well, we're not gonna get paid for saving a little girl from goblins like that. So these 4 women are like, well, I guess we're gonna have to do it. So they go out with gear that's too big for them. They don't know how to wield a sword. They go into this cave. They manage to fight the goblins off. And at the end of the first season, they level up to level 1 adventurers.
Wow.
Which is what they've never wanted to be.
Yeah.
So there's this great commentary there about this idea. And really what it brought to light for me is everybody has a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
What is that thing that took you from being a peasant who chase the adventurers to take their gear and sell it to them at a raised price and put you in the place of now being a first level adventurer. So that's one of the questions I always ask my players. Why are you here? What got you to a 3rd level?
Yeah.
What have you killed in the past? What have you done? Who have you worked for? Why? Why give up your comfy little life in a tavern somewhere to go out on the road and possibly die via the teeth of a dragon? You have a lot of questions there. And it's not as simple as well, I just wanted to be a druid. It's well...
But you could be a non-traveling druid. You could be a
non-traveling druid. Most of my druids are hermits. Druids hate people. Right? That's why they're druids.
That's why they're druids. And it's funny because I think about this, and again, this is a world building thing, but I think a lot about what does it mean to have adventurers in this society. So, SCA, my friend, D&D is not really. D&D has feudal trappings, but it has monarchs, but not feudalism, which is a little bit weird because it's weird to have monarchy without feudalism when that's what the system is about. It's this weird faux medieval thing, but you don't actually have the responsibility. It's all of the coolness of monarchy without any of the responsibilities. But I'm actually interested in the responsibilities, right? So if you have, that means that you might have responsibilities to your liege lord. What does that mean? And so serfs can't travel, right? Historically, serfs are bound to the land. They can't go anywhere. So then you have adventurers who travel, right? Most people in that kind of medieval world are not even allowed to travel. And certainly there's rules against these sumptuary laws about what kind of weapons you can have and who can and can't have weapons and all that. So we have this class of people, adventurers, who travel when a lot of people can't, besides perhaps merchants, often have weaponry that many other people are not even allowed to have, depending on how you sort of frame your game world. Mm-hmm. So who are these people? What does it mean to be one? What does it mean when they show up in your town? What does the presence of adventurers say about the authority of the noble of that area? Who, like, nobles have power because they have knights, right? Like, they have arms. They have a monopoly on violence. What does it mean when you have adventurers who also can do violence? Like, what does that mean for that world? And that's interesting to me to think about that, right?
Yeah, okay, so I remember. So the company who I made this series with is called Head Games Entertainment. They're a bunch of nerds. Actually, Jason, who was part of that, was the first GM for my podcast, North by Northwest. And Tiffany and I, who's still in North by Northwest, one of the producers, she and I did all the costumes for it. So Head Games Entertainment. We self-funded 2 sci-fi series that also were total parodies and jokes called Star Command, which, just as you can rightfully assume, I play an alien princess in that one too. And yes, you get to see some of my fight combat in that one. The second season. And then the fantasy one was called Suspension of Disbelief. It's called Suspension of Disbelief by Head Games Entertainment. If you can find it, it's out there somewhere. It's definitely low budge, but it's fucking funny.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah, you can find it. I don't usually share that with people because there are some things in my life that are embarrassing, but I adore all of you and I adore Troopers, so you can have it.
Thank you. We won't share, even though this is on the internet.
Yes, but... I know you will. You guys are going to find it and post some very embarrassing picture of me, I have no doubt.
And the thing is, I don't know, I just want, and this is about going deep. And again, I will note that there are people who don't want to do that. They just want a beer and pretzels game where they don't think about it and they just go and they're like, I'm going to kill the things. I got some stuff, got the stuff. And that's cool. But for me, I always want to know, I just want a little bit more. Do you know what I mean? Like I want, because as a player and also as a GM, I'm interested in character. Like, you're interested in stories. I'm interested in the character and what stories emerge from them. And I always find stories happen when you poke at characters, who they think themselves to be, where they are in the world. And so I always try to make a character that has, like Zeke, right? Zeke has a conflict, and that is he's a hermit who doesn't trust people, but he also has a heart of gold and actually likes people, right?
Right.
And so like it's this sort of tension between like, I don't trust people. I've been basically so isolated and like so profoundly lonely that I've just decided that I'm okay with it, but he's not, right? So it's that kind of tension about helping people but being isolated, right? That tension. And so then when you give us challenges like, okay, well, we're going to go here. What do you do about that? And I'm like, okay, how do I balance, you know, his kind of like, I mean, he's just been alone too long. And like, and his desire to actually not lose these few people that he has a connection with, but his sort of insecurity about that, right? And that becomes this sort of interesting drive that becomes his character problem, right? His character problem. Florian wants to be a great leader, and he doesn't think that his parents are because they don't know the people. So he wants to know the people, but he's not equipped to be able to do that. He's like, I think of him as like the most foppish noble who's been given all the wrong lessons about nobility, and he knows they're wrong, but he doesn't know how to fix it. So he just tries with no skills, right?
I have a noble character like that. I played her for a very long, extended Extra Life campaign. Her name is Princess Penelope Periwinkle. Her and Lore, they would be a match made in heaven. Princess Penelope Periwinkle was raised in a tower, and for this Extra Life campaign, she had ventured out for the first time ever to find adventure. That was her goal. She needed to find adventure. She didn't know how to do it, but she knew it was out there. So, of course, everybody totally screwed with her naive nature. And by the end, she was literally taking notes on like how best to find adventure. I think it's out there somewhere on Nerd Immersion's channel, but Princess Penelope Periwinkle is very similar, you know, in that she's just a noble and she's heard and she's read all these stories of what adventure looks like and what it's supposed to be. She just wants to go out and replicate it. And what really the adventure is just the step out the door. Yeah,
that's right. And
that's what adventure is.
And of course, the funny thing is that Florian is not wrong, because if he adventures, he's going to level up. right? And like, if he doesn't, he's not. Like, he's probably going to stay like a third level fighter for the rest of his life if he never actually goes adventuring. So if he is actually able to adventure, he may then level up and actually get to be somebody who is worthy of leading, right? Just through, and for me, I'm always interested in how can I make the mechanical process make sense in a story way?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's interesting to me. Like, I actually enjoy the challenge of thinking about what do these mechanics mean for the story. And so, yeah, if he adventures, he's going to get XP and level up, which is going to make him actually more powerful in the end than his parents. And he'll actually get the... He's going to... And because all the adventures are regular people, not nobles, most of them, he's going to actually get to meet regular people and to...
New perspective.
And get the perspectives. And then I think that in my mind... Hopefully, we don't know how it will actually turn out, but hopefully there's the possibility of him becoming a much better, more grounded noble than his parents will ever be.
God, his parents are weird. I mean, they came to that party, so...
Yes. But, of course, you don't know what will happen in the story, right? Like,
you never know.
I may continue to play Florian, and for all I know, he could backslide. Like, I don't know what will happen, what you throw at me, and then we would see what happens.
Yeah, so it's crazy because these are the conversations about character and story that I used to have when I was paying a lot of money to go to school. That they teach you about. They talk about building character and making choices and these kinds of things. And I realized I took all of that, and then when I hit the real world and actually got into a rehearsal hall, none of that was relevant. Didn't do any of that.
Because directors were fascists.
Right. Well, and because it's too quick, right?
Yeah.
I call it the cookie cutter method.
Yeah.
3 weeks of rehearsal, 4 weeks of a show. Cookie cutter, chunk, chunk, chunk.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, now you've gone and taken theater and you've turned it into a product, not a process.
Yeah.
And all story is process.
Yeah.
And I think what tabletop allows us to do is to break away from that and be able to come back to these conversations, and we can have conversation about it. You know, even today in my Discord, we were chatting, we're able to add an extra game to the Scum and Villainy campaign. And I said, you know what? We've got an extra game I didn't plan for. Let's do some flashback words and stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
And can I tell you, this is like maybe a spoiler perhaps, but it's a thought process.
Okay.
So Dot asked all of us as players to think, she said, what would be a really important, like, foundational moment for your character that we could do as a flashback? Think about this and like what would bring you into the Purloin Guild, right? And so this is the question that Dot gave me, and I thought, well, there's the obvious moment, right? The obvious moment is when Dev decides not to throw the race. That then spins his entire world into madness, right? That's the obvious thing. But I should probably dig a little bit deeper and not go for the obvious thing. And I thought maybe what might be better, because now that one, and of course I would ask you as the GM, which one would you prefer? I'm going to give you options. You pick the one you think would be best. And that one is like a good one I think would be really effective and really powerful and it'd be great. But what if the moment, instead of that moment when he doesn't throw the race, is actually when he's in the military. Something where he's like, I cannot be here anymore. And where for him, the Purloin Guild becomes a savior moment.
Right. Which is what I kind of want it to be. It's like, it's really not. It's still a guild. It's doing some kind of sketchy stuff. But is it the better option?
Right. And he probably doesn't know. He doesn't know, right? He doesn't really know the Purloin Guild exactly. But a moment where, like, I'm imagining maybe something kind of awful happens in the military. Maybe they want to do something wrong and he doesn't. And because here's the thing, he has low wisdom, our Dev. He is smart and he's perceptive, but he has low wisdom. And I think that he sometimes decides that that's not the right thing to do. And so you don't do the wrong thing, right?
Right.
And I imagine perhaps there was a moment in the military where he was with some people that were going to do the wrong thing and he said no. And that, again, did not turn out well for him, right? And so, like, for me, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a moment, maybe not that obvious moment, but a different moment.
A different moment.
That would actually also be perhaps interesting thematically with that murder that just happened, right?
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, very interesting. We'll have to chat about that.
Yeah,
I'm very interested to see what everybody comes up with, because you can definitely make the obvious choice of, like, right, and we can play through that.
Sure.
but my job is to take that and like, again, is to push you a little bit, is to turn
Yeah.
a bit deeper and push that limit. One, because I trust all of you and I hope you trust me too, but and we have safety tools at the table, but it makes for more interesting story. When you don't make the obvious choice, when you don't do things that are expected, like pulling your gun and blowing off the head of the general inside of the military base. That set yesterday's episode at a brand new pace and in a brand new way.
Good night, Atomica. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, so I don't know. I could literally sit here and I can talk story theory with you all night long. But, I mean, I don't even know, like, what you're looking. I can talk RP with you all night long.
But we are past my deadline time for our stream. Oh yes, I didn't want to end us too early, but we should probably call it.
Okay.
For the evening.
Any last minute questions?
Yes, last minute questions.
Let's do that.
For my people here in chat hanging out, do you have any last minute questions? And Rissa was like, is calling me an awesome player and a GM, and wish I had more chances of playing alongside. Thank you.
That's always the problem, right? All the games and none of the time is what I always tell people.
It is true, and I will tell you, I actually, can we have Dot on again? I'm excited to one day. I'm gonna just put this out there in the universe. I say put it out in the universe, and then maybe it will happen. One day I'm gonna GM for Dot. I don't know when that's gonna happen.
One day,
but one day it will happen. Maybe. Put it out in the universe.
Know what? Okay. I'll gift you all something. I don't do this very often.
Ooh.
I'll recite some Shakespeare to close out while you guys think of your last minute questions. All right. What do I want to do? Ooh, this is one of my favorites. Okay. From the Merchant of Venice. This is Portia. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth like the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. You see, it is twice blessed. It blesses him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attributes to awe and majesty wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptered sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself, and earthly power doth then show like God's when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, though justice be thy plea, consider this. In the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy, and that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. I love that speech.
Oh.
Well, snaps. I love that speech.
Do I still have it memorized? Ill met by moonlight, proud Titania. And then she says, right? Then she says the thing about like, what are you doing here? And he's like, Tarry, rash wanton, am I not thy lord? She says, well, then I must be thy lady. But never since middle summer spring have we in hill or dale, forest or mead, or by paved fountain of the rushy brook, danced our ringlets and sung our song to the. Oh, I don't have it memorized anymore. But I love that Titania speech.
It's so good. It's such a great speech.
Because she just breaks it down. She's like, no, you're an asshole. And like,
yeah, right. Like, you're really not a cool guy. You're just a jerk.
And you're ruining everything. The Ninesmith Morris is filled up with mud, and the quaint mazes in the wanton green for lack of tread are indistinguishable. And these ills are our fault. These
ills are our fault.
Yes, right? Oh my gosh.
Damn you, Shakespeare. I actually wrote, I love Shakespeare. One day I'll write an actual module story, but I built a character and I've written a small one-shot called The Making of a Play. It's my most meta game I've ever written. And the entire idea is that this bard, William Shakespeare, it has been challenged to write the greatest play about adventurers ever, but he's never actually gone on an adventure. He's just a poet. So he basically does a mass mailing to every adventurer he can get his name on and tells them that he's calling them to write a play about their life's work, about their life story. And all they have to do is show up. And whatever adventurers are in the party show up thinking that they're going to get a play written about their lives. And what he actually does is enlist them to go out and find adventure. And then they have to write their adventure down to be his play for this lore that he's writing for this wedding. It is super duper meta. And what I love about it is There is no, it's literally up to the players to be like, I don't know, where do we find adventure? I don't know, is it a cave? Do we go find goblins? Like, how do you write an adventure? And so it's very meta, like backwards view of it. And it's all about this total drunkard, William Shakespeare, who needs the best adventure play ever.
Dot.
Yeah.
I want us to do a scene together.
Okay.
Shakespeare.
Okay.
We just have to choose which one, and we'll
I'd
just
like to pick one.
We'll
I
pick
mean,
one. we gotta do it. We'll pick one. We'll do it. Because I just want to. Because here's the thing. I love Shakespeare, and I've not been able to do it in ages. And do you know? Oh, speaking of Julius Caesar, do you know I was able to be in a production, one of my favorite productions I was ever in, the African American Shakespeare Company.
Oh, cool.
In Oakland, did Julius Caesar, set in the Chicago in the early 60s, right? So Julius Caesar was basically a Malcolm X figure in the Nation of Islam, and of course gets assassinated, right? So there was this whole, and they're like riots in the streets. It was amazing. It was one of these things where, you know, I mean, what's great is that Shakespeare is in the public domain, so we can do what we want with Shakespeare, including reinterpret Shakespeare in ways that make it relevant to the current day. And how awesome is that?
Yep, I did. I used to work for one of the very first Shakespeare companies I worked for here, called North Fulton Drama. That's what we did. We'd take the plays and like set them in different time periods. So like my very first one with them was we did Measure for Measure, and we set it in the 1920s.
Nice.
My character was like a lounge singer. And then I think I did one, they did like King Lear set in World War II. I saw, what else did I do? God, I've done so many freaking Shakespeare plays. I don't know what I've done anymore and what I haven't done. Yeah, we'll pick one. We'll pick one. And we'll totally do a scene.
We'll just bust it out. I directed a Romeo and Juliet that I was really proud of. It was
cool.
1950s, and the Montagues were labor, and and the Capulets were the factory owners.
Oh, interesting.
And there's a strike, right? So there's the tension, because you know those like really bad labor clashes that are happening in the 50s.
Yep.
And so this was the clash. There was and having all this labor strife was really bad for politics, and there was an election happening. So the prince, who was the mayor, was like, no, we cannot have this. And it was because, you know, in the play, they keep referring to the Capulets as rich, and of course, probably the Montagues as well, but they never actually say that in the script. Right. So you can then read this sort of class difference. And it was also queer because Romeo was actually also a woman who was like this kind of cool butch woman, and Juliet and Romeo had this thing, and they're like, oh, problems, because they wanted to like marry off Juliet. It was really
That's
fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to direct a Macbeth, actually, that was set in like the 1980s, and they're metal bands. Their clans are metal bands. So like Lady Macbeth is and I already have like a song list and everything where they'd actually sing like rock and roll songs. Like she would open up with Man by the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, and then she would do her whole speech, and like, but the battles are actually battle of bands. And so there's just like whole like back alleyway, you know, very like Purple Rain style, like parking lot fighting going on, and everything takes place in like the dressing rooms and the backstage area, but it's all about the whole like the clans are these metal bands.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And then you've got the witches, which are definitely your groupies, and
Yeah, I love that. Also, soliloquies in Pig Latin. And the one last thing I'll say, this is like my one pet peeve about how we do Shakespeare.
Oh God.
Is that I think Shakespeare is more interesting than we tend, especially for women, than we tend to play them, right? Oh, yeah. Because we don't. So, for example, Juliet is very bold, right? Like she's making choices, and she is really risking a lot for what she's doing in that time period. Is exceedingly sort of
and everybody cuts her most important monologue.
Oh my gosh! Thank you.
Before she drinks it's like the most important aspect of Juliet altogether is that's the first monologue, Shakespeare monologue I ever did. I read it and was like, this girl is losing her mind. She's afraid of waking up inside of a crypt and seeing her cousin's ghost. She's debating whether or not to drink this, thinking that the priest may poison her and she may actually die. She is making some hard damn choices right now, and most people cut that monologue. So first off, I love you. Okay. Right. I love you too. Because that monologue is so important. It really tells you everything about her character and how strong and interesting she is. And they cut it so they can make her like a 1950s dippy ingenue. And that is not the character as written. Yeah. Oh, makes me crazy. Oh God, I love that. monologue so much.
It's one of the best, and it always frustrates me that it gets cut because it really
No, or it gets like chopped so it
Yes.
doesn't make as much sense anymore.
Mhm.
Like she has that one line from it. What is it? It rips me apart. It's just some of the most beautiful. Like, okay, so it's like her mother and the nurse come in and then she like bids them farewell and
Mhm.
she's like debating it. She's like, what if it's a poison, which the friar has suddenly mentored to have me dead? And
Mhm.
then she goes on to be like,
If I woke up mad and like plucked his bones.
yes, oh, if I wake up, shall I not be distraught?
Yes.
Ironed with all these hideous fears and madly play with my forefathers' joints,
Yes.
and pluck the mangled Tybalt from his shroud, and in this rage, as with some great kinsman's bones, as with a club, bash out my desperate brains. Like
Right?
she's talking about going crazy and using her kinsman's bones as a club to literally crack in her own head. It is so beautiful. It's so beautiful, and they just cut all of it because they don't think it's important.
It's so it's
The
yes.
feels we should talk Shakespeare. One day I'm gonna write an entire Shakespeare setting where it all of that's my goal is like William Shakespeare's this bard in this world, which can be like the ongoing NPC for the GM, but all in all, it's like there is the Macbeth castle,
Yeah.
and all of the stories are kind of playing out in this world, very I guess Candyland style, where you can go like from place to place
Yeah.
and experience them. It's this long-term goal. I have to write it and no time to do it.
I played an adventure at Gen Con that was a Romeo and Juliet adventure where the
cool.
players were kinsmen of the Montagues and Capulets, and both Romeo and Juliet go missing, and we each think the other side has done it.
Oh, interesting.
And so we have to form a party, half Capulets, half Montagues, and we have to find them, and we have to find them real fast because of course I was a Capulet. And I was like, Romeo's kidnapped Juliet. And they're like, Romeo wouldn't do that. I bet Juliet kidnapped Romeo. And so like, but we have to find them before it gets out. And it turns out that there was a wizard, a dragon, I think, who was tired of all the strife. And so kidnapped them to force the Montagues and the Capulets to work together. And we did in the end.
Cool.
It was very cool.
That's fun.
It was a little Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, right? Like play around the play. Yeah. It was good.
Cool. Man.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm talking your ear off. I'm so sorry.
Are you kidding? This is the best.
Like, I'm just like, don't get me started on Shakespeare.
No, I'm going to get you started on Shakespeare, but we'll have to do a scene later. We'll have to do a scene.
We'll have to come back. We'll read you guys some sonnets. We'll romance the shit out of you. Oh, we ought to do one from Much Ado About Nothing.
Oh, yeah.
That way we can just be like saucy with each other instead of like lovey-dovey.
No, let's be saucy.
Yeah, let's be super saucy.
I'm excited for the sauciness.
Shakespeare insults are one of my favorite things.
Oh, Shakespeare insults.
So good.
So good.
Okay.
All right. We're gonna go, everyone. So, everyone, I want to thank you all for being here, for hanging out in Gamer Stories. I hope you enjoyed it. I did. I just want to talk to all the gamers, no matter who they are, about their lives. It's the best thing ever. So you can. I'm gonna end on Little Red Dot. So you can find me on my channel. So on Tuesdays, I'm streaming the Purloin Code with Little Red Dot on her channel, and it's amazing. And that's going to be all throughout July. On Fridays, and that's at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on the Greyhawk channel, I am an emo dwarven cleric in the Ghosts of Saltmarsh. And then generally you can find me on Wednesdays here for Gamer Stories and Atlanta Nights. Thursdays, my Mac game, which is currently Night in the Woods. And those are at 6. And Saturday at noon, you can find me playing Horizon Zero Dawn. And this Sunday at noon, Eastern Time, Part 2, the final part of Cthulhu Confidential, the RPG that I'm running, 1 GM, 1 player with Jackie Dash. And that's where you can find me. But where can we find you, Little Red Dot?
All right.
And what are you doing? Tell me about your stream life.
Yes. Okay. So, if you are an audio person and really love a good podcast, we are wrapping up the 3rd volume of the podcast that I have been a part of from the beginning. It's kind of my origin story, called North by Northwest. We haven't announced it fully, but I'll give you guys a sneak preview. Moving into the 4th and 5th volume, I will become the GM. So get caught up. You don't necessarily have to listen from start to finish, but I highly encourage you to do so. My favorite character of all time that I've ever played, the one that's probably most personal to me, is coming to a wrapped up ending before I take over GMing. So it's been an emotional week because we had to record all of that and leaving a character you played the longest. So
Yeah.
North by Northwest, you can find us on Twitter, iTunes, Stitcher, all of the usual places. If you want to catch some of the live streams, Tuesdays right now are what are running on my channel. In addition to that, on Thursdays, you can catch me in 2 places. You can catch me over on Unmade Gaming's channel, playing some Cypher System in a kind of 1920s Cthulhu game called Men of Letters, where I play Joey. She's the Brooklyn or Boston newsy child who's just trying to figure out why she can't go back to her corner and sell papers. So you can check me out there. And then literally right after that, you can catch me with Margaret Crone on her channel playing through an original witch game that she's created with like teen witches called Spellcraft and Brews or something like that. Anyways, it should be coming out on market. She's been playtesting it, and I get to play a teen witch. She's kind of my gothy emo character. Her name's Cypher. She's a cyber witch.
Thank you for the link for North by Northwest Crit Witch. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And then on Saturdays, my home away from home is the Roll For It Network, where right now we're playing in a Game of Thrones campaign. We'll be doing that up until the fall, where we have officially announced we'll be bringing back our 2nd season of Vampire the Masquerade.
Does that mean I get more Dakota?
Dakota's coming back. I think I'm actually going to cosplay Dakota for Gen Con this year.
Ooh.
I think I'm just going to walk around and be really mean to people. I'm very excited about it, but you can always catch me Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over on Roll For It. No matter what we're playing, I am there because, like I said, they're kind of my home away from home. So the best way to just keep up with what I'm doing is to hit me up on Twitter, or you can come join the Dot Lot Discord.
Where do we find a link to the Dot Lot Discord? Where can we find it?
Good question. I pulled it down because we were getting a lot of spam. What I'll do, Truth, is actually give you a link and you can drop it in your Discord if you want.
I will.
Way to do that. Actually, you know what? For all of you, because you're not streaming your chat, I can grab a quick Discord link and do it right now.
Perfect.
So if you guys want to come join the Dot Lot, it's a pretty chill community. We talk about my games, but there's also just a lot of forums for you. And we have a new one, which is kind of exciting, called .con, which is all about conventions and meetups, and we're going to be having one at Gen Con. So you're welcome to come check that out.
Can I plug 2 other things about the Discord? Your Discord?
Mm-hmm.
1, it's got 2 very active looking for players and looking for group channels. So if you want to play some online with some, and the Dot Lot are a very good crew. So if you're like, I'm a player, I want to play in a game, or I'm a GM, I want to find some players, that is a great place that I would recommend to do that. But then also, Dot has Sunday Fun Days. So once a month, she runs 2 streams that community members can play in.
Correct.
And so if you're a member of her Discord, you can find out about the Sunday Fun Days through there.
My Patreon get first access. So we do one Sunday out of the month. We run basically 6 hours of games, 2 3-hour games. One of them is always D&D. So it is open to anybody. You don't have to have any background or knowledge of it. It is a complete entry-level game. Trooper plays in that one sometimes. That's where we get his lovely Lord character. But those are just one-shots. And they are crazy.
That's true.
They are high fantasy, but very bizarre. And then usually the second game of Sunday Fun Day is some additional tabletop game. So if you want to play something other than D&D, you can also sign up for those. I think coming up, I release the links actually tomorrow to Patreon. So by Monday, they'll be out for the general public for the rest of the slots for sign up. We're going to be doing For the Queen, which is a non-GM, no prep card story narrative game put out by Evil Hat. And the rest of the time we're playing through a Fate Accelerated game called Breakfast Cult, which is really fun, which is basically your kind of futuristic high school, just like you start out in detention, just like the Breakfast Club, but there are some odd kind of elder god things happening on campus. So each one's a little one-shot. It wraps up in itself, but all of you play students at the same high school called Occultar Academy. So that one's a lot of fun too. And I'll be putting out some more things. It looks like we may be playtesting Evil Hat's Secret of Cats in September. So if you want to play a magical cat, I think I'm going to set it in ancient Egypt because the fuck wouldn't I? So there's going to be a lot of opportunity, lots of ways to play, and it doesn't cost you anything. It's just first come, first serve signups. So if you just want a chance to play on the channel and play with good people, I got one for you.
Thank you, Dot. Thank you so much for being here, and I want to thank all of you who hung out for our stream and was here, and it was lovely. I will catch you all probably tomorrow, and you will probably catch Dot also sometime this week. So thank you, everybody, and I will catch you all on the flip side. Bye, everybody.
Bye.